Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. Is out of the way. Let's get into it turned into like a really wild slate on Tuesday. And it's crazy, right? Because like the Heisman was the focus of everything on Tuesday. I get it. Great story. Devontae Smith. I know I've said it 11 times, 10 minutes into the show. Devontae Smith is an incredible story. But if you were sitting in front of the TV, you were exposed. I don't know what the right word is, but you were privy to, maybe privy is the right way to put it, some incredible college hoops. And I don't think there was a single better game on Tuesday night. I don't think there might have been a single better game all season long than UConn going to Marquette and finding a way to pull out one of the most surreal, wild, unpredictable, unprecedented wins that, again, we've seen all season long. Huskies were down 18 points in the second half. If you missed it, came all the way back not only to win, but to win 65-54. So let's get into some of the particulars because I think this was, I don't want to overstate it, but I think this was a potentially like a program-changing kind of win. And for the backstory, most of you know, but for those of you who don't, I know I sound like a homer. It's because I probably am a homer. But I did go to UConn. I am a UConn alum. And, like, look, you know, I dealt with a couple bad years here as a UConn alum, as a UConn, I guess you would call it, a fan. I lived through the Kevin Ollie era, and obviously he won big in 2014 with Jim Calhoun's players. But if you're a longtime listener of this show, you know that dating back to the first season that I did this show, Kevin Ollie was still at UConn. It was the tail end of the Kevin Ollie era. I seem to remember Nick Coffey and I doing some kind of Kevin Ollie trivia, and it's been a couple years for UConn since they've been relevant. It was kind of funny. I was watching the game on, I guess it was Tuesday night, and the wife came in. She said, "Oh, UConn, are they good again yet? What's going on with them?" And it's funny because I have been personally a little bit more optimistic about UConn throughout kind of this spring, summer, fall, into the winter as anybody. But I was also realistic, right? They lost a bunch of key players off last year's team, most notably a senior named Christian Vital. And while I was really excited about them, really excited about the core that they had, a young guy by the name of James Bouknight who's getting real NBA draft lottery buzz, I was also realistic. You know, this was a team that, again, went 19-12 last year. They finished strong, but they're taking a step up in competition. They're leaving the AAC, and they're going to a really good Big East conference with a coach that is now in his third year, Dan Hurley, who, by the way, I've tried to get in this podcast a million times, neither here nor there. But a coach in a program that is heading into a new conference with a bunch of new players, young pieces, whatever. And so realistically, I tried to be honest with myself about what the ceiling of this team was in this season. James Bouknight, a really good player. But again, you're entering a completely new league where, one, the talent level is increased, but also you have to do 10 new scouting reports for 10 new teams that you've never played before. They've just got to figure out what you do and what you do well, but you have to figure out 10 new teams. And so I think when you factor that in with the fact that it's still a relatively young team. Two key players were coming off injuries coming into this season, including Tyler Polley, who we'll get into in a minute. A bunch of transfers, a bunch of young players. I said, look, I think UConn's a tournament team. But if they could just get back to the tournament and build off this into 2021, 2022, that is really what you're hoping for. Instead, it's been the exact opposite. In a year where UConn, again, is very young, in a new conference, and oh, by the way, has been shut down twice for COVID, I actually think it's early, but at 5-1, they have completely exceeded expectations. They beat USC at Mohegan Sun. They immediately go into pause for the COVID stuff. Then they come back. They play Creighton at home. They frankly outplayed Creighton. Probably should have won that game. They lose in overtime, but they bounce back with a win over DePaul. And Tuesday marked the first road game that they've played all year, at least the first game they've played out of Connecticut. And I'm just sitting there saying, okay, like, look, You lose this game, it's part of being in the Big East. It's part of being in a big boy conference. Sometimes you go on the road and you take L's, and it's no big deal. Beyond that, on top of it, not only are you going on the road for the first time with a young team, first road game in the Big East in 6 or 7 years, whenever's the last time they were in the Big East. But on top of that, they were going into this game with a real question mark, which is that they really didn't have a second scorer outside of James Bouknight. Even in that win against, or the near win, I should say, against Creighton, Bouknight went off for 40. Again, an incredible individual performance. But outside him, there weren't a lot of guys that were able to contribute. So UConn not only goes on the road, but falls down by 18 in the second half and comes back and wins. And what was incredible about this victory, they had an incredible performance by a kid off the bench named Tyler Polley, who is frankly one of the best stories in college basketball, right? I talked about Dante Allen last episode, the fact that he came off the bench for Kentucky as a redshirt freshman coming off an injury, 23 points, 7 for 11 from 3 in the win over Mississippi State. How about Tyler Polley? Tore his ACL last year at a time when UConn was just starting to peak in mid to late January. We didn't even know if he would be back. Now, the reports were always that he would be back this season, but you never know. Struggled early, struggled to get off the bench, comes in 23 points off the bench, a bunch of three-pointers. And this was a guy, by the way, that it's probably worth noting, had 19 total points in UConn's first 5 games of the season. So for him to come off the bench, do what he did, go 5 of 8 from 3, be the focal point of a rally in a game, by the way, where Bouknight actually got hurt. He hurt his elbow, missed a bunch of time in the first half. It was just an incredible win. And I don't want to be Homer alum guy, but I got to say this. I got to give credit to Dan Hurley, credit to this coaching staff, because I do feel like this program is a little bit ahead of schedule. That might sound crazy. That might be preposterous. It's UConn. You should always be relevant. But I'm telling you, man, first of all, the rebuild was real. It took time. But even going into last season, or coming out of last season, I should say, there was a lot of optimism. But like I said a minute ago, UConn lost a lot of players off last year's team, most notably a 4-year senior in Christian Vital. And there were a lot of people that were like, look, get to the Big East, be successful, let's keep on building on this. But UConn has blown those expectations out of water. They should have beat Creighton. They could have beat Creighton. They dominate DePaul, and then they go to Marquette. But what was most impressive, though, is the way that this team has played. And I talked about it last year when UConn got hot, and I'll talk about it today. They completely out-hustled. They out-wanted. They I don't even know the words to describe it, but they dominated Marquette on the boards, 42-28, including 15 offensive rebounds. And this was a game where UConn won this game based on will. Again, when your best player is hurt, he was on the court, but he was barely playing, not as effective, and you go deep into the bench, and this kid, Tyler Polley, comes up big. Just an incredible day, an incredible moment for UConn, and I had a bunch of people tweeting at me, and I think they're right, probably the best win so far of the Hurley era. So I don't really know what to say other than that, except that it was an exciting game. It was an awesome game, down 18 points. You come back, and you want 2 things. One, you get great contribution from a player who's just a great story. There's nothing else to say when a guy comes back from an ACL tear less than a year later and is contributing big time. But you also get big-time contribution from a guy that you need because, like I said, UConn needs a second scorer, and it appears as though they found it in Tyler Polley. I would add, I had a UConn buddy of mine text me during the game. This team does not look like James Bouknight plus a bunch of role players. This team is a group of guys that are finding their identity, finding their roles, and I'm telling you, they are in the Big East. I don't know if they're going to win it. Villanova, if they can ever get back on the court, is really good, but I really, really, really like this team, and I really, really like how they are built and how they are progressing throughout this season.